Willie?
Well, it's not just hospitals on the front lines in the fight against this pandemic, of course. It's also paramedics and firefighters who are the first responders. Congress passed a more than $8 billion emergency bill to combat the coronavirus, but none of the money goes directly to first responders for the protective gear and supplies they desperately need. Joining us now, Assistant to the General President of the International Association of Firefighters, Jim Brinkley. Jim, thanks for taking the time this morning. We appreciate it. We've talked so much and for good reason about what's going on in the hospitals and what healthcare providers need inside those hospitals in terms of equipment and gear. What do your fire stations need this morning?
We need that protective gear more than anyone else. We are the first link in the public health care chain. And when we lose the ability to protect that initial first link, we're in a dangerous situation. We received our first call on February 28th when we learned that 17 of our members in Washington State were quarantined. To date, we know that more than 1,000 of our firefighters, EMTs, and paramedics have been quarantined, and more than 60 of them have tested positive. And I want to be clear, that's with severe underreporting. That's coming from 700 of the 30,000 fire departments across North America. Look, we wouldn't dream of sending a soldier or a police officer to the front lines without their bulletproof vests. We wouldn't hand them a raincoat and say, this will at least stop the bullet. Sorry, we don't have the good stuff. But we're hearing guidance from the CDC that we should wear surgical masks, which we know are not effective, and this ridiculous claim that we can wear bandanas to protect ourselves. When you lose the ability to protect the protector, that's an imminent threat. And I want to be clear about this, too. It's not just about the firefighters, paramedics, and EMTs. It's about the American people. Think about calling 911 for a heart attack, stroke, or other emergency in your home. And the EMT that shows up just came from treating a COVID-19 patient, and they weren't wearing the proper protective equipment. That's the risk we face. We heard the outrage. We saw the images when there was no toilet paper on the shelves. Imagine dialing 911 and they tell you we're out of firefighters because they're in quarantine. We need to make sure that we get this gear to the firefighters, paramedics, and EMT that are on the front lines. It's critically important. The spending bill that was passed, fantastic. Let's get the ball rolling. But let's get it down to those local fire departments that need it critically right now.
As you know, Jim, some of the fire departments across this country are being told when a 911 call comes in, you've got to screen and ask if this is a COVID-19, a coronavirus call, and they redirect some of those calls so that firefighters are not exposing themselves if they don't have that equipment. Is that a recommendation you would make nationwide, that firefighters not respond to coronavirus calls?
Absolutely not. We are the first line of defense out there in our nation, and we need to respond to these calls. But we need the proper protective equipment to do that. What we are asking our members to do is to take extra precautions. Keep that distance when evaluating a patient. Limit the number of EMTs, paramedics, and firefighters that come into direct contact with that patient. And in those situations where we're doing the most dangerous procedures, intubation and other respiratory treatments, we need to make sure we have the N95, the protective gowns, goggles, and gloves. We're going to continue to respond. I want to make that clear to the American people. We don't back down. We will continue to respond when the call comes out, but we need to make sure that our workers are healthy and safe so that they can do that.
Hey, Jim, it's Jonathan Lemire. The firefighters across the country, as you just said, are coming into contact with people who have the coronavirus. And you say they expressed fears of many being quarantined. Already, particularly in the early days and weeks of this crisis, perhaps before some of the national restrictions where guidelines were put out there, how many firefighters, do you have a sense how many firefighters have been exposed, have been quarantined? Are there particular municipalities where there is a shortage now of firefighters because they've had to be taken offline because they've had possible contact with someone who has the virus?
Yeah, we know the reporting is very limited at this point. As I mentioned, 700 fire departments reporting more than 1,000 firefighters in quarantine. So if you extrapolate that out to the 30,000 fire departments that exist in this country, you can do the math. It's a great number of firefighters that are offline. We know in Washington, D.C., more than 100 firefighters are in quarantine right now. Hard-hit areas like Washington State, we've heard reports of more than a quarter of the fire department being offline right now in quarantine. What we're asking our members to do is to make sure that they're doing everything they can to protect themselves. And they're doing a fantastic job. We just need the equipment to continue that. We're in the early days of this. We're already talking about shortages. This is only going to get worse if we don't get the equipment in the hands of those who need it the most. It's great to stand at the podium and talk about 5 million masks being ordered. We're going to need 3.5 billion masks to deal with this pandemic. It's great to do a stimulus package, but if that money doesn't go directly to the firefighters, EMTs, and paramedics in your community, we're at great risk here.
Jim, your message is clear and strong, and we're so grateful to the work firefighters always do, and especially in this town. This time, Jim Brinkley with the International Association of Firefighters. Jim, thanks so much. We appreciate it.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.